Hello and welcome to another edition of The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have all of you focused learners joining us today. Now, I know, when we hear the phrase workplace fire safety, it's super easy to just roll our eyes. You think of it as just another dry, mandatory compliance task, right? Just a tedious box-ticking exercise. Well, today we are going to completely flip that perspective. We're breaking down fire safety and looking at it for what it truly is: vital, fascinating survival science. Understanding the anatomy of a fire isn't just about blindly following rules. It's about equipping yourself with the actual knowledge to outsmart a literally deadly threat.
Okay, so let's dive into our roadmap for today. We'll start off by looking at the reality of workplace fires. Then, Section 2, the causes, covering both accidents and arson. Third, we'll break down the fire triangle. Fourth, how a fire actually spreads. And finally, preventing the unthinkable.
Section 1. The reality of workplace fires, more than just statistics.
So, before we even start talking about safety rules and prevention strategies, we need to establish exactly why this matters to you personally every single day you walk into a building. Let's put this into perspective and kind of humanize the data here. In England alone, get this, fire services attend around 160,000 fires every single year. Break that down and it's about 440 fires daily. Out of those, roughly 15,000 happen in workplaces or public gathering areas. That means more than 40 times a day, a fire breaks out in a location just like the one you probably work in. So yeah, these aren't just rare freak occurrences, they're happening constantly.
Which actually brings me to a question that challenges our everyday complacency. Have you ever seen a fire door wedged open? Modern buildings are brilliantly engineered, right? They've got these inbuilt fire protections designed specifically to save your life. But human error constantly undermines all of that. Think about how often you walk through a workplace and see a heavy fire door propped open, and sometimes, ironically enough, with a fire extinguisher. If someone were to take that door completely off its hinges, you'd probably be outraged by the danger. But functionally speaking, a wedged open fire door is exactly the same as a missing on.
Moving on to Section 2, the causes, accidents, and arson.
Let's explore the underlying risks here, because the initial spark of a fire can come from surprisingly mundane places, or, as we'll see, shockingly malicious ones. What's really interesting about this is how completely everyday actions are the most common sources of ignition. We're not just talking about massive industrial failures, we're talking about basic neglect. The misuse of everyday electrical equipment, a faulty wire on a kitchen appliance, hot works like welding done without the proper clearance, or simply placing stuff too close to a heater, and of course the careless disposal of a cigarette. It's the mundane, everyday actions that most frequently set the stage for disaster.
But then, we have the other side of the coin, deliberate acts. Let's rapid fire through these shockingly diverse reasons for arson. People start fires for insurance fraud, trying to cash in on the devastation. Criminals use fire to conceal another crime, literally burning the evidence of burglaries or even murder. Then you've got business turf wars, fires started over strong political or ideological views, or outright terrorism meant to cause maximum fear. Bizarrely, fires are even started by kids who are just dreading going back to school after the holidays, or by folks struggling with mental illness who might just crave the thrill of a fire engine turning up. The threats are honestly as psychological as they are physical.
Section 3. The fire triangle explained.
Understanding those threats brings us to the fascinating and, slightly terrifying science of how a fire actually ignites. We gotta look at the literal spark. The fire triangle is a core scientific concept you absolutely must know, because fire is actually incredibly demanding. It relies on a super strict set of conditions to survive. If these elements aren't present simultaneously, a fire simply cannot start, let alone continue to burn.
So, the crucial point here is that you must have three things. First, heat, which acts as the initial ignition source. Second, fuel, and that can be anything from paper and wood to flammable chemicals. And third, oxygen, utilizing the roughly 20% of oxygen that naturally exists in our atmosphere. The real magic of fire safety lies in the rule of three. To outsmart and defeat a fire, you simply have to break this chain. Remove the heat, starve it of fuel, or smother its oxygen, and the fire dies. It's that simple.
Let's look at Section 4, how a fire spreads.
But what happens if we fail to break that chain? Shifting our focus from the initial spark to the escalation, this brilliantly illustrates how the complex spread of a fire digests into four neat categories of physics. First, there's direct burning, where a flame physically touches combustible fuel. Then there's radiation. That's heat waves passing directly through the air, kind of like the heat you feel radiating from the sun. Next up is convection, which is the dangerous upward movement of intensely hot gases that basically pool at the ceiling and spread outward. And finally, conduction. This is where heat travels straight through solid objects, so a fire in one room can heat a metal pipe enough to literally ignite materials on the totally opposite side of a wall.
And while the physics of heat spread are definitely terrifying, the flames aren't actually the only hazard. I want to add this really surprising and sobering fact. When common materials like PVC burn, over 100 different toxic compounds are produced. Fire hazards aren't just about structural collapse or getting burned. They are about deadly, suffocating smoke and a rapid lack of oxygen in your environment.
Which brings us to Section 5, Preventing the Unthinkable.
So, knowing the immense danger and the science behind it, we're going to shift entirely away from generic rules and focus on how to actually outsmart this deadly threat through practical, everyday habits. This is how you win. Control your waste and store it far away from the building to remove potential fuel. Challenge strangers who aren't wearing ID badges. That can literally stop an arsonist in their tracks. Install metal boxes inside letterboxes so burning materials can't just be pushed through. Secure your perimeters, make sure the locks work, and, this is crucially important, keep the areas near your doors totally clear of combustible materials. These really simple actions dramatically reduce the ease of access for criminals and minimize those accidental ignition risks we talked about.
Now let's ground all this theory into real-world action. If the unthinkable happens, hesitation is your absolute worst enemy. Anyone can and honestly should raise the alarm instantly. Sounding the alarm and calling 999 or 112, that isn't just the job of management or some designated fire warden. It is everyone's immediate responsibility. No exceptions. Furthermore, regular workplace fire safety checks are absolutely essential. Checking your equipment routinely ensures that fire extinguishers are actually accessible when you need them in those critical first few seconds, and not, as we discussed earlier, being used as a handy door wedge. It's these routine checks that prevent a small, easily handled incident from escalating into a full-scale tragedy.
I want to leave you with this incredibly hard-hitting quote directly from our source material. The impact of fire on the individual tends to be lifelong, from either emotional or physical scars. The memories of a fire are deep-seated. A fire has its own really distinctive smells, sounds, and sights, and those traumatic memories are so easily rekindled. The stakes of fire safety are just incredibly severe, and they literally last a lifetime.
So, I want to wrap up this explainer by challenging you with a provocative final thought. What will you do differently at work tomorrow? Will you close that wedge door? Will you move that box away from the heater? Take control of your environment, change your daily habits, and ensure that you never become just another statistic. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and please stay safe out there.